He was just one man, dancing alone in a public park. No speakers, no stage, no crowd, just a patch of worn grass and the rhythm in his own head. People passing by chuckled. Some pulled out their phones. Others shook their heads. Is this guy serious? One teen muttered to his friend as they recorded him for their TikTok. Laughter spread like wildfire. A group of young adults leaned against a railing nearby, pointing, whispering, giggling. They saw what looked like a grown man embarrassing himself in broad daylight. But they didn't know what was coming. They didn't realize they were watching the start of something that would leave the entire park, no, the entire internet, speechless. Because the moment he turned around, everything changed. And no one who was there that day would ever forget what they saw next. Before we get into it, I want to ask you something real quick. Have you ever judged someone based on a single moment? A single look, action, or mistake? We all have. It's human nature. It's part of how our brains try to make sense of the world quickly. We size people up in an instant. But what if I told you that some of those moments we laugh at are actually the ones we should be learning from? That sometimes what seems funny or awkward at first glance is hiding something powerful, something deeper than we could ever imagine. And that's exactly what happened in this story. If you stick with me, I promise by the end of this video, you won't just understand what really happened when that man turned around. You'll feel it. You'll remember it the next time you catch yourself staring, judging, or laughing too soon. Now, I'm not here to waste your time. You clicked on this video for a reason. Maybe you saw the title and thought, okay, what's this about? Maybe part of you expected a funny viral moment, maybe another dance fail. But I'm here to tell you, this isn't that. This story isn't just about a man dancing in a park. It's about what he stood for, what he revealed, and how that simple act forced a group of strangers to look at themselves in a way they never had before. And that's exactly why this moment went viral, why TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, all of them lit up with the same clip from 100 different angles. Because what happened next was bigger than just entertainment. It hit people. It made them stop scrolling and think. You see, sometimes the most unexpected moments carry the most powerful lessons. And this story, it'll remind you that just because someone doesn't fit the mold, just because they don't look or act the way you expect, doesn't mean they're not carrying something beautiful, something brave. So before you go anywhere, just stay with me for the next few minutes. Let me take you into the heart of this day, this man, this moment. I'll introduce you to the people who laughed, the ones who watched, the ones who filmed it, and the one man who danced like nobody was watching until everyone was. Let me set the stage for you. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in San Diego. The kind of day that makes you forget your worries. Kids chased frisbees. Couples strolled by the fountains. Food trucks lined the street, each one with lines full of people waiting for tacos, smoothies, Korean barbecue bowls, everything. It was a typical Southern California day where you could smell sunscreen and hear laughter and life buzzing from every direction. The park was alive, like a scene out of a movie, with dogs barking, music drifting through open windows, and families spreading picnic blankets under palm trees. In the middle of it all was one man. He didn't look like anyone special, at least not at first. Probably mid-40s. Wore an old hoodie, gray sweats, and a pair of sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His earbuds were in and he was just dancing. Not a flashy, professional kind of dancing either. No moonwalks or head spins or polished TikTok routines. His moves were strange, a little offbeat, arms moving like he didn't care what he looked like. Almost like he was doing it for someone else, someone who wasn't there. And that's what caught people's attention. It started small. A couple of girls sitting on a bench nearby nudged each other and pointed. One took out her phone. "Oh my God, he's dancing by himself," she laughed. Then a few college guys joined in, watching from the sidewalk and imitating his moves behind his back, bursting into laughter when he twirled like a ballerina. Soon more phones came out. Instagram stories were posted with captions like, "Who is this guy?" and "Bros lost his mind" face with tears of joy. Nobody approached him. Nobody asked what he was doing. They just watched, laughed, recorded. Because in 2025, that's what we do, right? We don't intervene, we post. We don't ask questions. We caption the moment for likes. But here's the thing. The story didn't end there. Because just when everyone thought they'd seen enough, just when the laughter was peaking and the comments were flying, he did something no one expected.
He stopped dancing.
He turned around. And that's when everything changed. I'll tell you exactly what happened next, but before I do, I need to prepare you. This story isn't going where you think it is. What you're about to learn will challenge your assumptions, maybe even hit a little close to home. Because behind this man's dancing, behind the laughter, the ridicule, and the social media buzz, was something raw, something real. A truth that forced an entire group of people to confront the way they treat others. And once you know what that truth was, you'll never look at a viral video the same way again. So, if you're thinking of clicking away right now, I'm telling you don't. Don't scroll. Don't skip. Because the answer to the question you came here for, the reason he turned around, and why it made everyone freeze, it's coming. And when it hits, it's going to stick with you. Let me take you back to that moment, the exact second he turned around. His back had been to the crowd for minutes. He'd been dancing for someone only he seemed to understand. But when he stopped, there was a strange stillness. People kept filming.
Some were still laughing.
But when he turned, and everyone saw what was on his face, what he was holding in his hand, everything shifted. And that, my friend, is where the real story begins. As the man turned to face the growing crowd, the playful giggles and amused whispers began to die off. In his hand, crumpled and faded, was a photo, a small, slightly torn picture with edges curled like it had been folded and refolded too many times. His eyes scanned the park, not with anger or confusion, but with something far heavier.
Grief.
But not the kind that erupts. The kind that festers. Quiet, buried, but unmistakably there. The onlookers who had been laughing a moment before now stood uncertain, some still holding their phones in midair, unsure whether to keep filming or lower their screens. They hadn't expected this. No one had. Whatever they thought this was, a joke, a viral prank, a weird dance challenge, it wasn't. And as the silence stretched, a few began to murmur. Is he okay? What's that in his hand? Was this part of something? But the man didn't speak. He just kept scanning the crowd, clutching the photo like it was the only thing tethering him to the ground. What nobody in that park knew was that this man hadn't just shown up randomly. He'd been there before. Not dancing, but walking.
Sitting.
Waiting. Over the past several weeks, regular parkgoers had seen him more than once. Always alone. Always carrying something small in his hand. A photo, sometimes a notebook. Once a small stuffed bear. Some assumed he was homeless. Others guessed he was just eccentric. No one ever asked. No one ever approached. And that was the first mistake. Because his story wasn't that of a drifter or a street performer looking for attention. It was the story of someone trying to hold on to the last place he felt whole. His name was Marcus Dean. 46 years old. Former music teacher.
Divorced.
No children, or so people thought. His life had once been ordinary, even joyful. He taught at a middle school just a few miles from the park. Known for being passionate, funny, even a little quirky, Marcus had a reputation among students as that cool teacher who let us play Billie Eilish during warm-ups, or the guy who taught us how to write music instead of just memorize it. His classes weren't about notes on a page. They were about expression, about connecting through sound, through movement, through rhythm. That's what made the footage of him dancing so surreal. It wasn't just a man flailing in a park. It was a man channeling something deeply familiar. Something he used to live by. But no one recording him knew that. No one filming with their phones knew that just a year before, Marcus's world had collapsed in a way most of us couldn't imagine. It started with a phone call.
Late.
Unexpected. The kind that jolts you upright and rewires your heartbeat. His younger sister, Jenna, had been in a car crash. A hit-and-run. She didn't make it. And worse, her daughter, Marcus's niece, Olivia, had been with her. Olivia survived. Barely. But when she woke up, she didn't remember the accident or anything at all. She was 6 years old, with no memory of her mother, no recollection of her home, her toys, her life. Doctors called it dissociative amnesia, likely trauma-induced. It was rare but not unheard of in cases of sudden loss. What followed were months of emotional chaos. Legal battles. Custody hearings. Marcus, the only remaining family, stepped up. He did everything he could: therapy, support groups, long drives to specialists across California. But nothing seemed to reach her. Until one day, while walking through that very same park, she danced. No music. No prompting. Just started spinning in circles and laughing like she was weightless. And for a fleeting moment, she smiled, a real smile, not the blank, polite one she'd worn for months. That park became their sanctuary, a place where Olivia slowly came back to life. But then, in a twist Marcus never saw coming, Olivia's biological father, absent for years, showed up with a lawyer and a claim for custody. Armed with a job, a new wife, and a polished appearance, he painted Marcus as unstable, emotionally unfit, and overly obsessed. The court, citing biological ties and financial security, ruled in favor of the father. Just like that, Olivia was gone. Moved to another state. No visits. No calls. No closure. And Marcus? He returned to the park. Every day. Same bench. Same patch of grass. Waiting, almost like he was trying to summon her with memories. The dancing began weeks later. Quiet at first. Sporadic. Then more frequent. Always in the same place where Olivia had twirled like a ballerina. Always alone. But the moment he turned around with that photo in his hand, it wasn't just about Olivia. Something had shifted. There was something about his face, about the way he clutched the image, that hinted at something more recent. More urgent. And as police would later confirm, earlier that morning, Marcus had reported the photo stolen. Not the original, he always carried that, but a duplicate he'd left at a local community board with a message beneath it. Have you seen this girl? The photo was missing.
Torn down. Defaced. Someone didn't want it there.
Someone wanted it gone. That was why Marcus had danced that day, why he'd chosen that exact time. Not just to remember, but to provoke. To make people see him. To make someone come forward. The question was, who? That was when the first theory started making rounds on social media. One of the young women who'd filmed Marcus swore she saw a man watching him from across the park. Tall, late 30s, dressed in black, wearing sunglasses, despite it being overcast. She said he didn't laugh, didn't speak, didn't film. Just stood.
Watched.
Then left before the man turned around. Others claimed it was probably nothing, just a random bystander. But that detail, that description, matched someone else who had been spotted in the park the week before. Same build. Same clothes. Same silence. And, according to a local Reddit thread, someone had anonymously posted a warning days earlier. Don't believe everything you see in the park. Some stories go deeper than they appear. Watch the man with the photo. Now, the question wasn't just who Marcus was or why he was dancing. It became, who was watching him? And what were they trying to hide? Stay with me, because we haven't even scratched the surface of the real reason everyone froze that day. The clues were there, in the background, on the edges of the frame, in some of the TikTok videos that went viral. A few frames here, a flash of motion there. Something, or someone, was moving just outside the crowd's attention. Something that makes you wonder, was this really just one man's grief, or was he trying to expose something far more dangerous? The first real obstacle came less than 48 hours after the park video went viral. It wasn't the online trolls or the cruel comment sections accusing Marcus of faking a breakdown for clout. He expected that. What he didn't expect was the call from Officer Renee Callahan, the same local cop who'd taken his initial report about the missing photo on the park bulletin board. Her voice was tense, tight. She said the case file was no longer active. When Marcus asked why, she paused and said it had been closed due to insufficient evidence and lack of actionable leads. But that made no sense. He'd just submitted new footage the night before. Clips showing not only his dance but a strange, barely noticeable figure pacing in the background across several angles. When he pressed her about it, she told him, almost apologetically, that the drive containing the footage had been corrupted. Tech issue, she claimed. It happens. Except Marcus knew it didn't just happen. Not when something that specific disappears at the exact moment it becomes useful. And then she added one final thing that made his stomach drop. Maybe it's time to let this go, Marcus. For your own peace of mind. Let it go. That was the line. The warning. The suggestion wrapped in concern. But Marcus had heard that tone before. When Jenna first started investigating Olivia's father years ago, before the accident, she got the same kind of talk from her HR rep, soft-voiced, subtle, meant to feel like protection, but hiding something sharp underneath. Marcus didn't have hard proof, but instinct was screaming now. Someone didn't want that photo on display. Someone didn't want questions being asked. And if a cop was hinting for him to back off, that meant he was getting close to something. Determined to find answers, Marcus dug into old files Jenna had saved on a shared cloud account. She'd been gathering information about Olivia's father, his employment records, financial inconsistencies, text messages with unexplained timestamps, receipts that didn't line up with his alibis. Jenna had believed he was involved in something darker, maybe even criminal. She'd suspected he wasn't just absent because he was careless. She thought he was hiding from someone. But when Marcus tried accessing the folder labeled Custody Battle Evidence, it was gone. Not moved. Deleted. And not recently. According to the metadata, it had been erased months ago. But here's the catch. Marcus had seen that folder just 2 weeks earlier. It was there. He remembered scrolling through it, trying to understand why Jenna had been so paranoid before her death. Now it was just vanished. Another digital ghost. Another accident. Frustrated and running out of safe leads, Marcus contacted the only other person Jenna had confided in during that chaotic time, her best friend and former coworker, Emily Brooks. Emily worked as a school counselor and had always been someone Jenna trusted implicitly. When Marcus called her, she hesitated at first. Her voice was different, colder than he remembered. She claimed she hadn't spoken to Jenna in the weeks leading up to the crash. Said they'd had a falling out over some personal disagreement and that she hadn't seen any of the evidence Jenna had been compiling. That didn't sit right with Marcus. Emily had practically been like an aunt to Olivia, always around, always involved. And now she was saying she didn't know anything? Still, Emily agreed to meet. They sat in a quiet diner, the kind that still had vinyl booths and smelled faintly of bacon grease, no matter the hour. She kept checking her phone, barely touched her coffee. But she offered one detail, just one, that threw Marcus completely. She said that weeks before the accident, Jenna had met with someone. A man she described only as a fixer. Not a cop. Not a lawyer.
Someone in between.
According to Emily, Jenna had grown scared. She believed she was being watched. Not by her ex, but by someone tied to him. She said she'd found something, Emily whispered, finally making eye contact. Something about where his money was coming from. She didn't say more. Just that it wasn't right. That it wasn't legal.
And that was it.
That was the crack in the wall Marcus needed, but it came with a new problem. That fixer Jenna had met? There was no name, no contact, no clue how to find him. And then, as he left the diner, Emily leaned in and added one last cryptic line. Be careful who you trust now, Marcus. Some people aren't who they say they are. At first, he thought she was being paranoid, or worse, dramatic. But then he noticed something that stopped him cold. Her phone, sitting on the table beside her napkin, was recording. Not a call. A voice memo. Their entire conversation had been captured. When he looked at her, she didn't flinch. Just slid it into her purse and smiled thinly. For my protection, she said. That night, Marcus returned to his apartment and found something waiting that made his blood run cold. A small, white envelope slipped under his door. No stamp. No markings. Inside was a single item, a printed still image, grainy, low quality, from one of the viral park videos. But it wasn't focused on Marcus. It wasn't even centered on him. The frame had been cropped to show a figure in the background, mid-step, blurry but visible. Standing just behind the crowd, half concealed by a tree, was a girl. Long hair, thin frame, dressed in a hoodie that looked strangely familiar. And scribbled beneath the image, in blocky red ink, were 4 chilling words. "You're looking the wrong way." Who took that photo? Was it meant as a warning or a clue? Marcus barely slept that night. That image, so haunting in its simplicity, so precise in its message, sat on his kitchen counter like a loaded weapon. The grainy face of the girl in the hoodie haunted him, not just because of the possibility it might be Olivia, but because deep down, something in her posture, her presence, felt eerily calculated. It wasn't just that she was in the background. It was how she was there, angled just enough to be seen, just blurry enough to be doubted. And the red ink note. "You're looking the wrong way." It wasn't a threat. It was a directive.
A dare.
A twisted breadcrumb meant to steer him off, or worse, deeper into something he couldn't yet see the edges of. But before he could decide whether to take that bait, the story twisted again, this time through someone he never expected to get dragged into the chaos. His younger brother, Ethan, called just after sunrise. Ethan, the rational one. A tech analyst who hated drama, kept his head down, and stayed clear of anything that smelled like conflict. When Marcus answered, Ethan sounded rattled. His voice rushed, unsteady. "Did you send me something?" he asked. Marcus blinked. "What are you talking about?" Ethan said a manila envelope had been left on the windshield of his car outside his apartment complex in Portland. No return address. Inside, a single photograph and a note, similar to what Marcus had received. But this time, the photo was of Jenna. It was taken from an odd angle, like a surveillance shot. She was in a grocery store, looking over her shoulder, visibly alarmed. The timestamp printed at the bottom showed it was from the same week she died. But the note? That was the real punch. It read, "Ask your brother what she was running from." Marcus froze. Ethan didn't know the full extent of what Marcus had been digging into. He didn't even know about Jenna's files or her suspicions before the crash. Marcus had kept all of it buried, thinking it would only make things harder if he dragged his family into the darkness. Now, clearly, someone had decided to do that for him. And the implication of the note wasn't subtle. It was accusatory. Whoever sent it wanted Ethan to believe Marcus had known all along. Worse, they wanted to drive a wedge between the only people Marcus had left. Still shaken, Marcus asked Ethan to send him a photo of the envelope and its contents. But just like before, the photo wouldn't upload. Every attempt returned a corrupt file error. The moment Ethan hung up, his phone restarted without warning, just a black screen for 5 long seconds before it blinked back to life. Ethan wasn't a paranoid guy, but he knew tech, and he told Marcus plainly, that wasn't random. What really unsettled Marcus, though, was what Ethan said next. "There's something else I didn't mention." Ethan had looked closer at the picture of Jenna, zooming in past her shoulder where her reflection appeared in the freezer glass door. "There's someone else in that shot," he said quietly. "Behind her, watching her." Marcus asked who. Ethan replied, "I think it's Emily." The revelation felt like a gut punch. Emily, the woman who'd claimed to be distant from Jenna, who said she hadn't seen her in weeks, who recorded their conversation and smiled about it, was possibly at the grocery store with her, watching her, lying about her last interactions? Marcus's mind spiraled. Had Emily been helping Jenna or tracking her? And if she'd lied once, what else was she hiding? Marcus started reviewing old footage from Jenna's private cloud, scraps she'd sent him over the years. Birthday parties, family outings, nothing suspicious at first glance. But in one video taken during a trip to a pumpkin patch, he spotted something strange. In the background, a tall man wearing a gray jacket and black baseball cap appeared in more than one clip, always standing just far enough back to avoid direct attention. Marcus scrubbed through the footage again. The same man appeared near the barn, later near the hayride, and again by the exit. His face was never fully visible, but his presence was clear. Marcus froze the frame and zoomed in. The jacket had a barely visible patch, one that looked military. He remembered Jenna once mentioning that Olivia's father had done some private security work with defense contractors before they split. Nothing ever proven, but there were whispers about off-the-record jobs, maybe even overseas gigs tied to surveillance contracts. She'd always brushed it off as old news. But what if it wasn't? What if someone from that world was still watching her, or Marcus? He called Emily again. No answer. Left a message. Nothing. Her voicemail box was full by the afternoon. By evening, he checked her apartment. Lights off. Mail untouched. Her neighbor said she hadn't been seen since the night she met Marcus at the diner. That was 2 days ago. And that's when the anxiety tipped into real fear. Because now there were too many questions spinning at once. Why had Emily lied about Jenna's last days? Why was a military-looking man tailing their family? Who sent the messages to Ethan and Marcus? And why pit them against each other? Was the girl in the hoodie a clue or a warning? But the biggest question of all was the one Marcus had started to dread asking. Had Jenna uncovered something so dangerous, so deeply buried, that even in death she was still being silenced? And just as he started to pull at that thread, his apartment Wi-Fi cut out. Then the lights flickered. Then the TV powered on by itself, displaying only static, before one phrase appeared in bright red digital text across the screen. Next time, don't dance alone. What was supposed to be a healing moment in a public park had now become a chilling countdown. The dance was never random. It was always being watched. And someone somewhere had just made their next move. The next morning didn't feel like morning at all. It felt like Marcus had awoken into someone else's dream, a world where nothing could be trusted, where the line between coincidence and control had completely vanished. The message on his TV screen replayed in his mind on a loop. Next time, don't dance alone. He couldn't shake the feeling that every move he made was now being choreographed by someone watching, orchestrated by a hand that stayed just out of sight. The coffee pot sputtered to life as usual, the familiar aroma filling the air, but it brought no comfort. His hands trembled as he lifted the mug to his lips. A quiet click outside his apartment door froze him mid-sip. He tiptoed toward it, holding his breath, but by the time he opened it, the hallway was empty. Only a small envelope lay tucked neatly against a frame, and when he bent to pick it up, he felt his chest tighten. It had no name, no address, just a single Polaroid inside. It was a photo of Olivia. She was standing in front of a gas station, her hoodie pulled low over her face. Marcus's heart thudded painfully. The image was recent. He could tell by the gas price displayed on the sign behind her, $4.69 per gallon, same as the station just 6 blocks away. But the real terror struck when he flipped the photo over. Written in the same red ink as the message before, "She knows about the fire." That phrase alone wasn't threatening, but Marcus felt the weight of it in his bones. Because the fire wasn't something anyone else should know about. Years ago, when Olivia was just a toddler and Jenna had returned to work at the VA hospital part-time, there had been a mysterious blaze at their rental home. Investigators ruled it as electrical, but Marcus had always been uneasy about it. Jenna had confided that she'd found a gas can in the backyard days before and thought someone might have tried to scare them. They never went public with it. Never reported that part. They didn't want to be seen as unstable, didn't want to drag Olivia into something darker. But now, years later, someone had dredged up that buried piece of their past and used it like a knife pressed to Marcus's throat. He rushed to the gas station. The clerk recognized Olivia's photo immediately. Yeah, she came in 2 nights ago. Bought water, snacks. Seemed jittery. Like she was waiting for someone, then left without saying a word. Marcus's voice cracked as he asked for the security footage, but the manager declined. Said the hard drive had been corrupted by a power surge the night before. Just like his Wi-Fi. Just like Ethan's phone. Too many accidents. Too many systems failing at just the right time. He stepped outside, staring at the intersection, trying to picture where Olivia would have gone next. That's when he saw it. A black SUV idling across the street. It wasn't parked illegally, but it hadn't moved since he arrived. The windows were tinted so dark he couldn't see the driver, but the second he looked at it too long, the vehicle pulled away slowly, deliberately. Marcus jumped into his car and followed. His pulse pounded as he tried to keep pace without being obvious, weaving through traffic as the SUV turned down a quiet industrial road. But halfway down, it disappeared, gone as if it had vanished into the asphalt. No tire marks, no turnoffs. Just an empty road, and the hum of his engine echoing back at him. When he returned home, the door was ajar. His stomach dropped. He hadn't left it open. Every part of him screamed not to go in, but he couldn't stop himself. The living room looked untouched, but when he stepped into the bedroom, his chest tightened. His laptop had been removed from its usual spot on the desk. In its place was a burner phone. It buzzed the second he touched it. A message flashed across the screen. "If you tell Ethan, he disappears too." That was it. No sender. No number. Just the kind of message that made Marcus feel like his entire world was now dangling by a thread, and someone else was holding the scissors. Panic took hold, flooding him with memories of every moment he doubted his instincts, every time he told himself he was imagining it, every conversation he should have recorded, every detail he hadn't written down. He checked his phone. His contacts were gone. Every one of them. His camera roll had been wiped. Even his cloud backup required a password reset. And when he tried to do it, the prompt came up in Russian. He left the apartment with only his wallet and keys. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay there. Every face on the street felt suspicious. The man feeding pigeons on the bench near the crosswalk. The woman with oversized sunglasses talking loudly on her phone. He could feel eyes on him everywhere. He stopped by the corner pharmacy to grab a burner phone of his own, paid in cash, and immediately called the only other person he trusted, Jenna's old colleague from the hospital, Dr. Carla Mendez. She hadn't been in contact since Jenna's funeral, but Carla had always been blunt and unflinching. If anyone knew something or sent something off, it would be her. Carla didn't answer. But a minute later, Marcus got a message from a random number. "Leave this alone or you'll end up like her." No name. No clue who it came from. Just that same red-ink tone, but now digital. As Marcus stood frozen in the parking lot, heart racing, his phone buzzed again. A new message. This time with a photo. Of Carla. It was a screenshot from a traffic cam. Her car was pulled over on the side of a rural highway. Her door was wide open, and her purse was lying on the ground next to it. Marcus couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. He didn't know where Carla was. He didn't know where Olivia was. All he knew was that they were all being hunted, manipulated, and watched, and now, whoever was behind it had made their intentions clear. This wasn't about a dance. It wasn't about Olivia. It was about control. And Marcus had just been warned in the clearest, most terrifying way possible. The next move was his. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that someone else had just stepped into the story. Someone who'd been quiet until now. Someone watching from even higher up the ladder. And they had everything to lose if the truth ever came out. The rain had started as a soft whisper against the windshield, but by the time Marcus reached the edge of town, it was coming down in waves. The rhythm of the wipers and the hiss of wet tires on asphalt were the only sounds keeping him grounded as his mind spiraled in every direction. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't even stopped long enough to process what was happening. All he knew was that the world he thought he understood, his family, his memories, even his fears, had just been flipped upside down. He pulled into a forgotten gas station just past the city limits, the kind that barely survived off late-night truckers and wandering souls. The lights flickered above him as he stepped out into the storm, still gripping the burner phone like a lifeline. He wasn't sure why he'd come here. Maybe some part of him hoped the isolation would bring clarity, or maybe he was running on instinct now, raw, primal, survival-driven instinct. Inside the station, the air was stale, the shelves half-stocked, and the clerk didn't even look up from his phone. But just as Marcus turned toward the drink cooler, he heard a voice that nearly made his knees give out. "Took you long enough." He spun around and there she was, Olivia. Hair soaked, hoodie drawn tight, eyes wide and wild like a deer caught between headlights. She looked older somehow, like the last few days had aged her more than the last few years. She motioned for him to stay quiet and follow, leading him silently out the back and into a rusted red pickup that hadn't moved in years. "We don't have time," she whispered. "They're listening. Everywhere." Marcus wanted to hug her, scream, cry, demand answers, but her urgency locked him in place. As they sat in the back seat, Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out something he hadn't seen in years. Jenna's old necklace. A delicate chain with a small locket she never took off, not even in sleep. But it wasn't the jewelry that mattered, it was what she said next. "Mom didn't die in the accident," Olivia whispered. "That's what I came to tell you. That's why they're after me. She's alive." The words didn't register at first. They couldn't. The night the crash had burned into Marcus's brain so vividly that nothing could unseat it. The smoke, the sirens, the coroner's report. But Olivia's face wasn't one of speculation. It was absolute conviction. "I saw her," she continued. "Not once. Not a shadow or a voice. I saw her. Last month. She came to the motel where I've been hiding. She didn't stay long. Just long enough to warn me. To say they faked everything." Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came. He couldn't grasp what she was saying, but the tears forming in her eyes told him she wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't breaking down. She was remembering. That's when she dropped the real bomb. "Dad, you weren't the one being watched. I was. This whole time." Her hands shook as she reached into her hoodie again and pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything. Emails, videos, recordings. She gave it to me that night and told me to run. Said she tried to get away from them, but they needed her. Needed her to make sure no one could trace what happened in the fire. And that the people who came after us, after you, they weren't strangers." Marcus stared at the flash drive like it was radioactive. "Then who are they?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. Olivia looked out the window, rain streaking down the glass like tears. "People you trusted," she said. "People you let into our lives." And then, without warning, she named a name that turned Marcus's blood to ice. "Ethan." He laughed at first. A hollow, dry sound of disbelief. "No. That's not possible. Ethan, he's family." But even as he said it, memories surged back with cruel clarity. Ethan showing up unannounced the night Marcus's Wi-Fi went down. Ethan's phone conveniently dying at the dance. Ethan being the one to suggest they not involve the cops. All those moments that felt protective now reeked of manipulation. Marcus felt sick. But why? Why would he? Because he was working with Mom, Olivia said, her voice cracking now. Not against her. At least not at first. She told me she used to trust him, that he helped her cover up the fire years ago, but then he started changing. Started acting like someone else. Said they owed people favors. Said it was bigger than us. She didn't even recognize him anymore by the end. The rain thundered around them like a warning bell as Marcus stared at the flash drive, its tiny metal body now feeling heavier than any truth he'd ever carried. Everything they thought they knew, the fire, the crash, the surveillance, it was all part of something deeper, something orchestrated not by a faceless villain, but by someone they'd loved and trusted. And as he sat there, heart pounding in his chest, Olivia leaned in and whispered one final truth that shattered whatever was left of his old world. She said the fire wasn't an accident, Dad. She said it was meant for you. And just like that, the walls around the story caved in, leaving behind a chilling new reality, one where Marcus wasn't just searching for answers. He was running from a past that had been rewritten behind his back by people who had played the long game to perfection. The real question now wasn't who to trust, it was whether the truth was even survivable. The moment Marcus stepped back into his car, soaked from the storm and gripping that tiny flash drive like it was made of glass, he knew he couldn't keep pretending that this was just some twisted coincidence. The idea that everything around him, his home, his family, his friendships, had been manipulated or staged was almost too much to bear. But the name Olivia had dropped echoed in his head louder than the storm pounding outside. Ethan. That single word had shifted the ground beneath his feet. Ethan, who had been with Marcus through every one of life's worst moments, who had stood by him like a brother, who held his son the day he was born. If any of this was true, Marcus would have to go against the one person he had never questioned. But that wasn't even the hardest part. What hit the hardest was the realization that if Ethan was involved, Marcus had unknowingly brought his enemy into the heart of his family. And now, He had to decide whether to risk losing everything again by confronting him, or keep quiet and live in a lie. Back home, the house felt colder than usual. The creaks in the floorboards sounded more deliberate, as if the house itself was watching. Marcus paced, holding the flash drive, wondering how many years of conversations, secrets, and blind trust he'd need to unravel to get to the truth. He plugged the drive into his old laptop, the one not connected to the internet, the one he hadn't used since before the fire. The screen flickered. Dozens of folders appeared, some labeled in codes only his wife and he would have understood. Birthdays, song lyrics, the name of their first dog. Olivia hadn't been lying. The files were real. As he opened the first video, the face that greeted him made his heart seize. His wife. Not a photo, not a shadowy surveillance image, but a clear recording, her voice trembling but determined. She spoke directly into the camera, saying she hoped one day Marcus would find this and finally understand why everything happened the way it did. She admitted to faking her death, but not to escape them, rather to protect Marcus and the kids. "If I stayed," she said, "they would have used me against you. They already tried. And Ethan, he wasn't always like this."
But they got to him.
He thought he was helping at first, until he wasn't. Her words blurred with the pounding in Marcus's ears. He slammed the laptop shut, gasping, the room spinning. He wasn't ready to see more.
Not yet.
But it was too late to pull back now. The phone buzzed. A new text, unknown number. The message was blunt, brutal, and unmistakably personal. Choose. Bring the drive to the old railway station by midnight, or say goodbye to Olivia. No police. No games. There was no signature. No emoji. Just cold, calculated threat. His heart dropped. The place they named was 20 minutes outside town, a place so abandoned that even teenagers didn't dare party there anymore. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of the ultimatum crushing his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. If he followed through, he might be walking into a trap. If he didn't, he might lose his daughter forever. He looked over at the framed photo of Olivia on the mantel, the one taken just weeks before the fire. She had her arms around his waist, smiling with her eyes closed, like she trusted the world to keep her safe. Now that same girl was caught in the crossfire of secrets he hadn't even known existed. Rage, grief, and guilt swirled inside him, and yet there was no one to blame. Not yet. Only questions. Only shadows. Then came the knock.
Soft.
Unthreatening. Like a neighbor dropping by. Marcus moved cautiously toward the door, barely breathing. Through the peephole, he saw Ethan's familiar figure, calm as ever, holding a brown bag in one hand like he was just stopping by for a beer and a chat. Marcus's blood turned to fire. Here stood the man who might have orchestrated the destruction of his life, and yet smiled like nothing was wrong. He opened the door slowly, forcing calm into his voice. "Didn't expect you this late." Ethan shrugged casually. "Saw your car in town earlier. Thought I'd check in. Been worried about you, man." Marcus nodded, letting him in. Inside, Ethan glanced around like everything was fine, like Olivia wasn't missing, like a threat hadn't just been sent to Marcus's phone. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "You look like hell." There was a long pause before Marcus said, "We need to talk." That's when everything in the air shifted. Marcus saw it, the flicker in Ethan's eyes, the way his shoulders subtly tensed, the way his hand hovered over the edge of the bag. There was something in that bag, something more than a six-pack or a leftover takeout. Marcus had seen enough body language in courtrooms to know when someone was bluffing and when they were cornered. He realized then that confronting Ethan wouldn't bring closure. It would be war. One wrong move, and Olivia would be the price. But the story didn't stop there. Because just as Marcus started to ask the question he'd been dreading, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. For a split second, his confident mask slipped. Then, without looking up, he muttered, "You weren't supposed to get the drive. She was never supposed to find you." That was it. Confirmation. Not a confession, but enough to know the world Marcus thought he lived in was completely gone. And in that moment, with Ethan still standing in his kitchen, smiling like nothing had changed, Marcus knew the impossible choice had just escalated into something far more dangerous. He would have to play along, pretend he didn't know, and meet the blackmailers at midnight, all while sitting across from the man who might have started it all. And as the storm outside finally broke into lightning and thunder, Marcus made his silent decision. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. But he wasn't sure yet if that decision would save Olivia or destroy everything he had left. The air inside Marcus's house had shifted from tense to suffocating, the silence between him and Ethan broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Marcus sat across from the man who had once been like a brother to him, their eyes locked in a quiet standoff. Every second dragged like a lifetime. But then Ethan's phone buzzed again, twice this time. He glanced at it, muttered something about needing to take the call outside, and stepped onto the porch. That's when Marcus's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Ethan's bag, tore it open, and what he found inside wasn't just shocking, it was world-ending. Documents, maps, photos, surveillance shots of his house, his daughter's school, Olivia's hospital records from before the fire. Even a burner phone with messages coordinating deliveries and drops. But what made Marcus go cold was a folder stamped with the name of his old law firm, sealed and labeled Phase 3.
This wasn't about him.
It never was. He wasn't the target. He was the delivery system. As Ethan paced outside, whispering into his phone, Marcus snapped photos of the documents with his own cell and slid everything back just as Ethan re-entered the house. But now he couldn't look at him the same. This wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. A game Ethan had been playing for years. And if Marcus had to guess, he wasn't the only one being played. Later that night, Marcus drove to the old railway station, the flash drive burning a hole in his pocket. But he wasn't going alone. In a desperate move, he'd called Nora, his former colleague from the DA's office, and one of the few people he still trusted. Or so he thought. She met him at the edge of the tracks, flashlight in hand, expression unreadable. "What exactly are you walking into?" she asked. Marcus handed her the burner phone he'd found. She scrolled through the messages, her face going pale. This goes beyond personal," she muttered. "These codes, they're linked to federal case files. Witness relocation, false identities, sealed indictments. Marcus, I think your wife wasn't just hiding from Ethan. She was hiding from a program she was forced into." Then, before he could respond, a pair of headlights lit up the station yard. A black SUV rolled in slowly, deliberately. Marcus shoved the flash drive into Nora's hand and told her to hide. As he stepped forward, alone, a man in a suit exited the vehicle. Older, sharp-featured, someone who looked like he belonged in Washington more than a dirt-covered train yard. "Mr. Keene," the man said calmly, "you've seen things you weren't meant to see. Your wife was part of a failed operation, an informant who broke protocol. We gave her a new life. But she broke back through to find you. And that's a problem for both of you now." Marcus's hands clenched. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled slightly. "We want you to forget. Walk away. Burn the drive. And in return, your daughter lives a long, quiet life. You keep your house.
Your job.
No accidents. No sudden disappearances. Or you keep digging, and we erase everything. Again." But what they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that Nora hadn't just hidden. She'd already uploaded the drive's contents to an encrypted cloud using a secure channel Marcus gave her. It was a bluff, but it was the only leverage they had. As the man waited for Marcus's answer, Marcus met his stare and said just 3 words, "It's already out." The man didn't flinch. "Then you've chosen war." The SUV door opened again, and out stepped Ethan. But this time he wasn't smiling. He looked broken, desperate, like someone being forced to finish something he no longer believed in. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice hoarse. "I tried to stop it. I tried to warn you." Marcus turned to him, fury and betrayal bleeding together. "You stood in my home. You smiled at my kid. And all that time you were helping them? I was helping you survive." Ethan shouted. "You don't understand what they're capable of. They let Olivia live because I cooperated. That was the deal. But it's off the table now." Sirens echoed in the distance, too far to matter yet, but close enough to unsettle everyone. The suited man looked to Ethan. "Finish this, or we finish you." And that's when it happened. Ethan turned.
Slowly.
Deliberately. And instead of pulling the gun Marcus was sure he had, he knelt down. "I'm done," he said. "Let them go." Chaos erupted. One of the men by the SUV lunged forward, shouting into a radio. Marcus dove behind a rusted column just as a shot rang out, followed by another. Tires screeched. Nora screamed. And as dust filled the air and the sound of retreating vehicles faded into the distance, Marcus crawled forward to where Ethan lay bleeding. "I bought you 10 minutes, Ethan whispered. "Use it." Marcus didn't have time to process the moment. He grabbed Nora, the drive, and ran into the trees. They didn't know how many were left, or who else was watching. But as the stars vanished behind clouds and the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and smoke, Marcus knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't about one man dancing alone anymore. This was about every person who had ever disappeared without a trace, every whistleblower who had accidentally vanished, every secret the system buried beneath headlines and classified files. And now, thanks to one dying man's choice, Marcus had the key to blow it all open. The only question left was, could he live long enough to do it? The rain came down in sheets, heavy and relentless, as Marcus pulled the hood of his jacket tighter around his face and stepped out of the shadows. They'd chosen the old botanical garden for the final meet, a place no longer maintained, overgrown with tangled ivy and vines swallowing once beautiful glass structures. It was fitting in a twisted way. Nature reclaiming the forgotten. Secrets buried beneath beauty. Nora walked beside him, quiet but steady, her hand clenched around the flash drive they'd duplicated and hidden in 3 different safety deposit boxes across the state. The time for running was over. Everything led here: the surveillance, the threats, Olivia's disappearance, the blackmail, the photos, and above all, the file labeled Phase 3. This wasn't just about a covert program. It was a playbook for psychological manipulation, domestic control tactics, and orchestrated public humiliation designed to eliminate dissenters before they ever spoke out. It was government-sanctioned character assassination, with Marcus as its final loose thread. Inside the glass house, lit by a ring of flickering battery-powered floodlights, stood the architect of it all, Cameron Stroud, the man Marcus had once unknowingly represented in a legal settlement 10 years ago, back when he was still fresh out of law school. Stroud hadn't just built a network. He had embedded himself in the legal system, in the political infrastructure, and in private tech firms. What Marcus had stumbled into all those years ago, what he thought was just a strange NDA case, turned out to be the beta test of a massive digital erasure project. People disappeared not with guns, but with ruined credit, criminal records faked through data leaks, and deepfake videos that destroyed reputations overnight. Olivia had been one of their internal whistleblowers. She wasn't fleeing a stalker. She was fleeing a machine. Stroud's voice was calm, composed. "Marcus, you were always smart, but you never learned when to stop being curious." "You murdered Ethan," Marcus replied, eyes fixed on him. "You destroyed Olivia's life. You tried to ruin mine. All because she figured out you were laundering identities through real estate trusts." Stroud smiled. "She figured out more than that. She figured out how to reverse it, how to restore someone's digital identity. And that, my friend, is unacceptable." The lights flickered again. And that's when Marcus noticed it. Movement in the shadows behind Stroud. Not guards. Not agents. Cameras. Small ones.
Drones.
The kind of discreet surveillance only someone like Olivia would have planned for if she anticipated the showdown. Which she did. Suddenly, from behind the overgrowth, a voice rang out. One Marcus hadn't heard in almost 2 years. "You always like to monologue, Cameron." It was Olivia. Pale, thinner, but very much alive. She stepped into the light, her phone connected to a streaming rig. "This is live. Not cached, not local, live, across 4 platforms. Say hi to America." Stroud froze. His calm mask cracked. "You think this matters? You think the public will care?" That they'll believe a dead woman and a disgraced lawyer? But Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. I don't need them to believe it. I just need them to see it. We traced your shell companies, the offshore accounts, the fake charities. It's all on that drive. You built a conspiracy so big, you started believing no one could ever expose it. That's always how they fall. Not from bullets. From pride. Stroud lunged, reaching for something under his coat, but before he could draw, a sharp burst of electricity cut through the air. Nora, standing just behind Marcus, had triggered the taser. He hit the ground hard, convulsing once before going limp. Silence returned, except for the soft buzzing of the drones above. Olivia moved quickly, zip-tying his wrists, then turning to Marcus. He was never the only one, she said quietly. This goes deeper. He was just one of the faces. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The climax had hit, but it wasn't the ending. It was just the lid being torn off. Somewhere out there, others like Stroud were still moving pieces, still burying truths under layers of lies. But tonight, they'd exposed the playbook. Just as Marcus turned to leave, he felt his phone vibrate. One new message. Unknown sender. No subject. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. A photo of his daughter, sitting in her classroom, smiling. And next to her, a teacher he didn't recognize, wearing a gold ring with a serpent emblem. The same emblem found on one of Stroud's old files. Marcus looked at Olivia. It's not over, he whispered. And she nodded. It never was. The screen fades to black, but in the minds of viewers, the image burns bright. Because just when you think you know the truth, the real game begins. Weeks passed, and the world outside didn't change overnight. The trees still swayed with spring winds, people still checked their phones obsessively, and news cycles kept spinning with new scandals and distractions. But for Marcus, everything had shifted. The garden confrontation had gone viral, not because it trended like a celebrity drama or a flashy prank video, but because it felt real.
Raw.
Olivia's stream had pierced through the cynicism of the internet like a blade. Viewers weren't just entertained. They were rattled. What started as whispers in the darker corners of Reddit and threads buried in the conspiracy subforums exploded across YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. Hashtags like #DigitalGhosts, #OliviaLives, and #SerpentRings swarmed the feeds. Influencers dissected the footage frame by frame. Journalists followed the money trail. The public wanted blood, but more than that, they wanted answers. And they wanted them from the man who had become the reluctant symbol of defiance against digital erasure, Marcus. He spent days dodging press, ignoring calls from podcast hosts, and pushing back offers for book deals. He wasn't a hero, and he didn't want to become another pawn in the same system that had nearly destroyed him. But still, he knew he had a responsibility. So he gave one interview, just one. A long-form sit-down on a rising truth-focused channel run by a former investigative reporter turned YouTuber, the kind of creator who didn't care about drama but about impact. He told the story from the beginning, the anonymous videos, the haunting laugh at the dance, the forgotten clients, the disappearance of friends, and the unraveling of everything he once trusted. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He just told the truth, the way people are desperate to hear it. That single video reached millions in a week. Not because it was flashy, but because it hit something deep in the American psyche, a fear that maybe, just maybe, our identities could be rewritten, our past corrupted, and no one would ever know. Olivia, now living under federal protection, began consulting quietly with privacy advocates and lawmakers who suddenly found themselves facing an electorate demanding real change. Nora left her job in corporate intelligence and founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to digital rights, helping everyday people detect and fight manipulation tactics online. Ethan's sister contacted Marcus, thanking him not just for uncovering the truth, but for giving her closure she never thought she'd have. And Marcus, after months of silence, finally opened the last envelope Olivia had handed him. Inside was a small, weathered photograph of him at college, sitting on a bench, smiling. Next to him was a man he didn't recognize, but who wore a familiar gold serpent ring. Olivia had written one line on the back. They've been watching longer than you know. The revelation didn't crush him. It freed him. Because sometimes knowing the depth of the deception is the only way to truly reclaim your power. He began journaling, not for publication, but for his daughter, so she would know the world not as a sanitized fairy tale, but as a complex web of truth, manipulation, courage, and consequence. And every night, before she went to sleep, he told her stories. Not about villains and heroes, but about people who refused to stay silent even when no one believed them. Yet somewhere in the city, under the hum of neon signs and the distant wail of sirens, something else stirred. A young woman in a hoodie watched a live stream glitch for just half a second before it corrected itself, just a flicker, barely noticeable. But she saw it. A signature code embedded in the pixels. One she recognized from the Serpent Ring files. And just like that, a new thread began to unravel. Because while this chapter had closed, the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. And out there, in the coded shadows of the digital world, someone else had just started dancing alone. But this time, no one was laughing. And now it's your turn to ask yourself, how much of what you see is real, and how much is someone else's design? Let that thought sit with you. Because the next story might be yours.